Who the hell can you trust now?
When World War II is mentioned, and for some reason, certain countries are left out, and more obvious, or more often than not, it is Russia. What sayeth you about this case?
Rick, you sometimes wonder if it is malign or just ignorance on the behalf of Washington currently. Because you look at the likes of Trump and Pence, and you hang your head in frustration and rage at the level of ignorance that emanates from these individuals. No nation, no army gave more to the defeat of the barbaric Nazi forces of Hitler than Russia and the Red Army. You have mentioned the 27 million Russians, and that's in many quarters considered to be an underestimate. 27 million Russians who lost their lives in the battle against Hitler. For every one US soldier that died in the Second World War, 80 Red Army soldiers died in the Second World War. You have the fact, the historical fact, anyone with any semblance of historical accuracy and dignity would have to accept that Operation Barbarossa was Hitler's biggest mistake because he opened the front with the Soviet Union. The Battle of Stalingrad, the Battle of Kursk, the biggest tank battle in the history of the world. Those were the key battles that defeated Hitler's fascist hordes. The Western Front, let's face it, wasn't opened up until 1944, despite the promises that were given to the Soviet Union by Churchill and Roosevelt for years before. That front wasn't opened up, and by the time it was opened up, the back of the Hitler army had already been broken by the Soviet Union. So it is ridiculous, Rick, ridiculous for the US and the UK to pay homage to, quite rightfully, the men and the women who died in the Second World War defeating fascism, but to fail to give special honor to the men and women of Russia, and particularly the forces of the Red Army, expertly marshaled by General Zhukov.
Very few people.
At 11 in the morning on November the 11th, 1918, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, World War I came to an end. President Woodrow Wilson of the United States arrived in Europe, promising to create a new world order. New world order. New world order. President Woodrow Wilson of the New World Order. He persuaded the world's leaders to sign up to a new League of Nations. At the Treaty of Versailles, they agreed that from now on, disputes between countries would be resolved not by fighting, but by debate in the League. The peoples of Europe were set free. Germany's ally, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was dismembered. Out of it, new nations were created. Austria, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Germany itself was greatly reduced in size. And when he returned to America, Wilson's New World Order immediately fell apart. The US Congress decided it could not risk being sucked into another war in Europe. It refused to join his league, and the US withdrew into
States will withdraw.
The U.S. has withdrawn from 8 deals it has signed.
The U.S. does have a history of withdrawing.
The US withdrew into isolationism. Hitler announced Austria's incorporation into the Third Reich. A sovereign nation had, for the first time, been subsumed into a greater Germany. Once again, the Western democracies failed to react.
Now, I want to deal with a couple of points that have been coming up on social media. and also points which are particularly important to me. I want to deal, first of all, with how it was that the Nazi menace was allowed to grow and grow entirely illegally in breach of international law until it became the power that it was, subjugating all of Europe. And the reason for that is appeasement. The ruling elites in France and in Britain believed that appeasing Hitler, and if possible turning him to the east, turning him towards his arch enemy, the USSR, was the best way of handling this tiger. They did not seek to clip the claws even of that tiger, merely to turn that tiger in a different direction. And we had many opportunities. Time does not allow me to do justice to them all. The reoccupation of the Tsar land, the rearmament, the remilitarization of parts of Germany that had been forbidden such militarization, the rearmament, the building of a Luftwaffe, the building of a massive naval fleet, the building of a submarine fleet, all of them illegal under the international law imposed at the end of the First World War, were all allowed to be done. The League of Nations did nothing. Fascist aggression by Mussolini in Abyssinia did absolutely nothing, worse than nothing, in the Hitler and Mussolini empowered, enabled fascist coup of General Franco in Spain. Indeed, if I was to identify a precise point at which it was possible to have stopped Hitler and Mussolini in their tracks, it would have been in the defense of the Spanish Republic. Instead, a policy of non-intervention was declared, which was, of course, a policy of intervention on the side of Franco, because Hitler and Mussolini were allowed to provide the air force, provide the soldiers, provide the armaments with which the fascists drowned Spain in blood. If Britain and France had come to the aid of the Spanish Republic, rather than leaving it to the advance guard in our finest hour as a labor movement, the advance guard of the International Brigade from all the countries of the world, if they had not left it to our grandfathers and grandmothers, if they had used their armed force to come to the aid of the Spanish Republic, Hitler and Mussolini could have been stopped, and the Second World War and the Holocaust itself could have been stopped. But there is an overarching theme here, and a number of people have asked me to deal with this point this evening, although they were handing me a boomerang that they themselves had thrown. So let me throw it back at them. There's, you know, the old saying, a little knowledge is dangerous. There's a surprising number of people out there who think the important thing in this story is the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Well, I'm going to talk to you about a pact which was concluded 11 months earlier, after Stalin had offered to send 1 million Soviet soldiers to defend the borders of Europe and had been spurned. A pact was drawn up between the British Prime Minister Chamberlain, the French Prime Minister Daladier, and Adolf Hitler at Munich. The Chamberlain-Hitler Pact, the Daladier-Hitler Pact, at which Czechoslovakia was handed to the Nazis.
In the summer of 1938, he turned on his next prey, Czechoslovakia. A substantial German minority lived in the northwest of the country, an area known as the Sudetenland. These Sudeten Germans had been part of the old Austrian Empire, but had been cut off when Czechoslovakia was created in 1919. This was the time bomb that had started ticking at the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler encouraged Sudeten German demands for autonomy and then threatened the Czech government with force if it refused to agree. Undaunted, the Czech government ordered general mobilization and prepared to resist. The Czechoslovak army was large and well equipped, with formidable fortifications on its frontier with Germany. Hitler backed off. But then at the beginning of September, concerned that war might be imminent, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain decided to act as a peacemaker. He flew to meet Hitler twice. The Nazi dictator assured him that if he could have the Sudetenland, he would make no further territorial demands in Europe. In Munich, on September the 29th, 1938, with Mussolini acting as mediator, France and Britain signed an agreement giving the Sudetenland to Germany in return for a formal declaration by Hitler that he had no more territorial ambitions. Chamberlain flew back to Britain waving the piece of paper, which he claimed guarantees peace in our time.
Nobody seems to know on social media that it was us that concluded a pact with Hitler, leaving Stalin absolutely no other option but to conclude the Ribbentrop-Molotov pact 11 months after our pact with Adolf Hitler, because of course at that point it was abundantly clear that Britain and France had no intention of fighting Hitler under the appeaser governments, especially the Chamberlain appeaser government. And therefore the Soviet Union had to do what it could do to give itself territorial hinterland, to protect the motherland, and to rearm and reorganize the Red Army for the inevitable onslaught of fascism, which it fully expected and was preparing for. So we could have stopped Hitler. We could have allied with the Soviet Union. We could have destroyed fascism and Nazism long before 1939, and we should have done so. But we did not. And I've referred earlier to the gallant stand which we made alone against the beasts of fascism who were only 29 miles away from landing on our shores. But our Royal Navy, and especially during the Battle of Britain, our airmen and women and our allies from Canada, Australia, from Poland and other parts of the world who had come here as the last free standing place that they could in order to enlist and to serve the anti-fascist cause. We can be proud of our country's role in the war, and there's nothing wrong with patriotism.
From the great steel city of Stalingrad, ghastly now in its smoking heaps of shell and bomb-battered rubble, has emerged the most stupendous story of human courage and endurance. In this red-hot hell, appalling bombardment has reduced a noble city to wholesale ruin. Thousands have died in the bloodiest siege of history. Day and night for months on end, the defenders of Stalingrad have fought the most glorious battle in Russian history. On the city's outer perimeter, Red Army men maintain their stubborn resistance. Even though the once model city crumbles under the fire of German siege guns, they never give in. Many times the world expected the fall of Stalingrad, but not so the defenders. They made every foot a death trap for the invaders. To win 2 buildings or 50 yards of roadway, the Germans had to sacrifice hundreds of lives. Street fighting on an unprecedented scale decimated the Nazis, while the Soviet soldiers held on like grim death. Every square became a battleground, every building a fortress. The city of suffering refused to go down. Amid the gutted shells of buildings, in the reeking shambles of its streets, the ghostly remains of a population of 500,000 people eke out a terrible existence. This doesn't look like a city capable of victory, but by the most superb feat of arms, the city of Stalingrad has triumphed, and not only stemmed the tide, but hurled the Nazis back and passed over to the offensive. Nazi hopes of easy conquest are buried in the ruins of unconquerable Stalingrad. The 25th anniversary of the foundation of the Red Army has been marked by a series of victories which have desperately wounded the Germans and brought their prestige and morale crashing down. Salute to the Soviet. More newsreel material from the USSR, which we present in the form of a broad pictorial survey of the relentless Russian advance. Stormoviks help to draw the noose tighter around the neck of German resistance as success is added to success along the entire front. Vigorous armored blows are being dealt in every sector. We are back among the place names of the early days of the German invasion. To the more recent major victories of Rostov, Krasnodar, Voroshilovgrad and Kharkov are being added others almost daily. A commonplace remark these days is, I wonder where the Russians have got to today. There is much evidence to support the belief that unless the Germans pull something out of the bag pretty soon, retreat will turn to complete rout. About the time these pictures were taken, there came out of Moscow an estimate of Nazi losses over a period of 9 weeks. Approaching 1/3 of Hitler's Eastern Army was claimed to have been routed. A high percentage of these divisions was liquidated at Stalingrad, and a lot has happened since then. Here is but one corner of Soviet soil packed with captured Nazi arms and equipment. The twin fuselage of a Fokker-Wulf, which, with many others, fell into Russian hands when a swift attack on an aerodrome had the Germans on the run before they could completely destroy their machines. And here are the ersatz overboots with which the Germans are supplied to combat the snow and ice. A huge joke to the Russians who display the synthetic footwear. How the bitter weather has eaten into the Nazis is clearly shown in these studies of frostbitten, frozen prisoners of Hitler's army of dejection. A gallery that needs no further comment. The fear of defeat hangs over these shivering Nazis, plodding their way out of a war which is no longer the victory march to Moscow. The ragged rabble of the Reich, merciless and bestial in success, sullen and morbid in failure. Inside the prison compound, they herd together for warmth. There may be some among them who remember stocking the German concentration camps in Poland and Czechoslovakia. There are certainly many who gloried in the agony they brought to Russia. So sure of victory were they, that they never thought it possible they themselves would ever drink of the cup of suffering. As they planned, so it is their lot to reap the desolation. The Soviet Baltic fleet has been constantly in action against the fascist invaders, battering at their coastal positions in the north, guarding Leningrad from attack by sea. Soviet aircraft, leading the counteroffensive, continue to give the Hun a bellyful of his own medicine. The RAF wing, number 151, made up of 2 squadrons of Hurricanes, did great work before returning to Britain. It helped to save Murmansk, and it escorted Soviet bombers on many a raid. Squadron leader Anthony Rook is among those awarded the Order of Lenin for skill and valor. Sergeant Howe is another to receive the same decoration. 2 of the first 4 Soviet medals awarded to members of the British forces. When the Hurricanes are above us, we need never look up, said the Russian bomber crews. Polish regiments have been formed in Russia and equipped by Britain and the United States. They have already shared in local victories during the Soviet advance. Members of a brave and cultured nation now tortured and held in slavery by the Germans, these Polish troops, like their Russian comrades, know what invasion means. Their resolution has been tempered in a fire which we in Britain have not yet experienced. Now for a glimpse of Hitler's retreat from Moscow, a few items from Russia's winter program. Soviet troops turning from retreat to attack, driving the powerful and hitherto invincible German army back across the snow. Isolated details of the enormous German casualties. Germans who were promised comfortable winter quarters in Moscow. Soldiers who will never visit Moscow nor return to Germany. 350,000 killed in 2 months. Material abandoned by their retreating comrades, beaten back by General Zhukov. Vehicles left behind in a hurry. And the uniform of a quisling from Norway. German helmets marking German graves. Milestones on the road back. Sights multiplied 10,000 times along the 2,000-mile front. Fragments of the fiercest fighting the world has ever known. A frozen front, scorched earth, the fate of the world hanging in the balance, while 2 colossal armies fight it out to the death. Shivering prisoners, men who hid from their retreating comrades and gave themselves up. Deceived, disillusioned, and broken, they surrender to the Red Army. The Red Army's advance continues, but spring is on the way, and still greater tests of strength and endurance are absolutely certain to come with it. We must be ready this time. Russia needs more than admiration from us. Intense Russian pressure on all sectors of the front sets the stage for a German disaster. Latest pictures out of Russia show part of the great Soviet offensive, which is smashing its way into von Manstein's defense line. To the symphony of gunfire is added the eerie note of Katyushka, the Soviet rocket guns. As the solid progress of Russian arms is maintained, the Nazis are forced out of the great towns and cities of the Union. Secretly, the Germans must know that no place is secure from the oncoming Red Army, which today finds itself nearer to Berlin than to Moscow. With every Russian success, we hear of Soviet regiments being given the name of towns they have liberated. For many, it is a return after months and even years of unutterable hardship and torment. The thin stream of the homeless, starting life again with nothing but what they carry. Yet from Russia today, there come the repeated notes of victory. With each brilliant success, Marshal Stalin issues an order of the day, and from the Red Square Moscow, the salvos of guns crash out their triumphant message. From Berlin went out the orders which plunged Europe into war in 1939. Now, in a far different Berlin, Field Marshal Keitel, chief of the German High Command, arrives at Russian headquarters to sign the last act of unconditional surrender. After this, it'll be a tough job for any future German to argue that the Wehrmacht wasn't absolutely and utterly defeated. Luftwaffe General Stumpf also signed on the dotted line. A Russian delegation looked on approvingly while Air Chief Marshal Tedder signed. The act of surrender was then signed for Russia by Marshal Zhukov, who smashed the Germans outside Moscow in 1941. In the serene loveliness of the Alps, the United States 7th Army opened up an hotel packed with as mixed a bag of high personages as you could find anywhere in Europe. Among them was the wife of Dr. Schuschnigg, former Austrian Chancellor, and their child born in captivity. A particularly interesting occupant of this high-class concentration camp was Fritz Thyssen. With him was his wife. Thyssen put up the money for Hitler's first bid for power. Later, the Führer got too big to handle, and the Thyssens found themselves brushed off. Then there was General Halder and his wife, a top ranker of the German High Command. He was probably imprisoned for trying to teach Hitler to be a general. Another ex-Hitler stooge was Nicholas Horthy, son of the Nazis' puppet dictator of Hungary. There was, however, at least one German there with a clean record, Pastor Niemöller. A determined opponent of the Nazis and all they stood for, he suffered years in prison for his courage. Some British prisoners were being held here, reportedly for use as hostages. Among them were Captain Elphinstone, nephew of the Queen, Lieutenant Alexander, a relative of Field Marshal Alexander, Lieutenant Lord Lascelles, son of the Princess Royal, and Lieutenant John Wynant, son of the American ambassador in London, Europe's strange hotel.
To the decision by the United States of America to withdraw.
President Trump is now planning to withdraw.
The U.S. is withdrawing its support for the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty. He told the NRA that the pact threatens the Second Amendment's freedom.
The Trump administration has made it official. The U.S. is pulling out of a decades-long nuclear treaty with Russia, sparking fears of a new arms race we thought was confined to the Cold War. More than 30 years after Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signed the historic nuclear arms pact, known as the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the deal is now dead. The news has ignited fears here in Europe, especially that European ports and cities could be reached by Russian missiles. CNN's John Laurent has more on the significance of this treaty.
The United States taking a stand against Russia. A senior U.S. defense official tells CNN the U.S. is preparing to test a non-nuclear mobile-launched cruise missile. It was developed specifically to challenge Russia in Europe. The move comes as the U.S. exits the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with Moscow.
Самым острым и обсуждаемым на сегодняшний день вопросом российско-американских отношений остается односторонний выход США из договора о ракетах средней и меньшей дальности. Поэтому просто вынужден остановиться на этом чуть подробнее. Да, действительно, с момента заключения этого договора в 1987 году произошли серьезные изменения в мире. Многие страны развивали и продолжают развивать данный вид вооружения, а Россия и США нет. Мы сами себя добровольно в этом ограничиваем. Такое положение дел, конечно же, может вызывать вопросы, понятно. Ну, так нужно было нашим американским партнерам так и сказать. Сказать по-честному, а не использовать надуманные обвинения в адрес России для обоснования своего одностороннего выхода из договора. Сделали бы лучше, как вот в 2002 году. Из ПРО вышли, все в открытую, по-честному. Хорошо это или плохо, другой вопрос. Я считаю, что плохо. Но сделали так и все. И здесь надо было так поступить, именно по-честному. А как они действуют на самом деле? Сами все нарушают, а потом ищут оправдания и назначают виновных. Но еще и своих сателлитов мобилизуют. Они так аккуратненько, но все-таки американцам подхрюкивают по этому вопросу. Сперва начали разработку и применение ракет средней дальности, присвоив им для отвода глаз наименование ракеты-мишени для целей ПРО. Затем приступили к развертыванию в Европе универсальных пусковых установок МК-41, которые позволяют осуществить боевое применение крылатых ракет средней дальности «Томагавк». Я говорю об этом только потому и трачу свое и ваше время, что мы вынуждены отвечать на те обвинения, которые слышим в наш адрес. Но вот, сделав все это, о чем я сейчас сказал, США откровенно пренебрегли, демонстративно проигнорировали совокупность положений, предусмотренных статьями 4 и 6 договора о ракетах средней и меньшей дальности. В частности, согласно пункту 1 статьи 4 договора, я цитирую, каждая из сторон ликвидирует свои ракеты средней дальности и пусковые установки таких ракет, чтобы ни у одной из сторон не имелось таких ракет и таких пусковых установок. В статье 6 пункт 1 говорится, зачитываю дословно, по вступлению в силу настоящего договора и в дальнейшем ни одна из сторон не производит никаких ракет средней дальности, не проводит летных испытаний таких ракет и не производит никаких ступеней для таких ракет и никаких пусковых установок таких ракет. Конец цитаты. Запуская ракеты-мишени средней дальности и размещая в Румынии и Польше пусковые установки, пригодные для применения крылатых ракет «Томагавк», США эти требования договора прямо и грубо нарушили. Ну, сделали же это уже давно. В Румынии уже стоят эти пусковые установки. И ничего, вроде как ничего и не происходит. Странно прям. Но для нас ничего странного нет. Но люди должны это видеть и понимать. Как мы оцениваем в этой связи ситуацию? Я уже говорил и хочу повторить. Россия не намерена, это очень важно, я повторяю это специально, Россия не намерена первой размещать подобные ракеты в Европе. Если же они действительно будут произведены и поставлены на европейский континент, а США такие планы имеют, во всяком случае, мы не слышали обратных заявлений, то это резко обострит ситуацию в сфере международной безопасности. Создаст для России серьезные угрозы. Ведь у некоторых классов этих ракет подлетное время до Москвы может составить до 10-12 минут. И это и есть очень серьезная угроза для нас. В таком случае мы будем вынуждены, я хочу это подчеркнуть, именно вынуждены предусмотреть зеркальные и асимметричные действия. Что это значит? Скажу уже сегодня, прямо и открыто, чтобы никто нас потом ни в чем не упрекал, чтобы всем было заранее ясно, о чем здесь идет речь. Россия будет вынуждена создать и развернуть виды вооружений, которые могут быть использованы не только в отношении тех территорий, с которых для нас будет исходить соответствующая прямая угроза, но и в отношении тех территорий, где находятся центры принятия решений по применению угрожающих нам ракетных комплексов. Что в этой связи важно? И здесь много новизны. По своим тактико-техническим данным, в том числе по подлетному времени до указанных центров управления, эти вооружения будут вполне соответствовать тем угрозам, которые направлены против России. Знаем, как это сделать, и реализуем эти планы немедленно, как только соответствующие угрозы для нас станут реальными. Не думаю, что международная обстановка сегодня такова. Не думаю, что международная обстановка сегодня такова, что требует дополнительного и безответственного обострения. Мы этого не хотим. Что здесь хочу добавить? Американские коллеги уже пытались получить абсолютное военное превосходство с помощью глобальной ПРО. Нужно оставить подобные иллюзии. Ответ с нашей стороны всегда будет действенным и эффективным. Работа по перспективным образцам и системам вооружения, о которых говорил в послании прошлого года, продолжается ритмично, без сбоев, по плану. Началось серийное производство комплекса «Авангард», о котором сегодня уже упоминал. В этом году, как и планировалось, им будет оснащен первый полк РВСН. Проводится и цикл испытаний тяжелой, беспрецедентной по мощности межконтинентальной ракеты «Сармат». Лазерные установки «Пересвет» и авиационные комплексы с гиперзвуковыми ракетами «Кинжал» в режиме опытно-боевого дежурства подтвердили свои уникальные характеристики. Личный состав получил опыт их эксплуатации. В декабре этого года все поставленные вооруженные силы «Пересвета» заступят на боевое дежурство. Продолжится и работа по расширению инфраструктуры базирования самолетов МиГ-31, оснащенных ракетами «Кинжал». Успешно проходят испытания крылатая ракета неограниченной дальности с ядерной двигательной установкой «Буревестник», а также подводной неограниченной дальности беспилотный аппарат «Посейдон». В этой связи хочу сделать одно важное замечание. Ранее об этом не говорилось, но сегодня можно сказать. Уже весной этого года будет спущена на воду первая атомная подводная лодка, носитель этого беспилотного комплекса. Работа идет по плану. Сегодня считаю возможным также официально проинформировать вас и еще об одной перспективной новинке. Помните, в прошлый раз я говорил, есть еще сказать, пока рановато. Вот потихонечку так будем рассказывать, что у нас там в загашнике. Так вот, еще об одной перспективной новинке, работа над которой идет успешно и в запланированные сроки, безусловно, будет завершена. А именно, хочу сказать о гиперзвуковой ракете «Циркон» со скоростью полета около 9 махов. На дальность более 1000 километров, способные поражать как морские, так и наземные цели. Ее применение предусмотрено с морских носителей, серийных надводных кораблей и подводных лодок, в том числе уже произведенных и строящихся под ракетные комплексы высокоточного оружия «Калибр». То есть все это будет для нас незатратно. В этой связи хочу подчеркнуть, что для защиты национальных интересов России на 2-3 года ранее сроков, установленных госпрограммой вооружения, военно-морскому флоту России будут переданы 7 новых многоцелевых подводных лодок. И в ближайшее время будет заложено 5 надводных кораблей дальней морской зоны. И еще 16 кораблей такого класса будут введены в состав ВМФ до 2027 года. Завершая тему одностороннего выхода США из договора о ракетах средней и меньшей дальности, хотел бы сказать следующее. В последние годы США проводят на российском направлении политику, которую вряд ли можно назвать дружественной. Законные интересы России игнорируются. Постоянно организуются разного рода антироссийские акции. Абсолютно неспровоцированно, хочу это подчеркнуть, неспровоцированно с нашей стороны вводятся все новые и новые незаконные с точки зрения международного права санкции. Практически полностью и в одностороннем порядке демонтируется сложившаяся за последние десятилетия договорно-правовая база международной безопасности. И при этом Россию уже называют чуть ли не главной угрозой для США. Скажу прямо, это неправда. Россия хочет иметь полноценные, равноправные и дружеские отношения с США. Россия никому не угрожает, а все наши действия в сфере безопасности носят исключительно ответный, а значит оборонительный характер. Мы не заинтересованы в конфронтации и не хотим ее, тем более с такой глобальной державой, как Соединенные Штаты Америки. Но, похоже, наши партнеры не замечают, как и какими темпами меняется мир. Они продолжают свою разрушительную и явно ошибочную политику. Вряд ли это соответствует интересам самих США. Но это не нам решать. Мы видим, что имеем дело с деятельными, очень талантливыми людьми. Однако среди правящего класса США много и таких, кто излишне увлечен идеей своей исключительности и своего превосходства над всем остальным миром. Разумеется, это их право думать так, как они хотят. Но считать-то они умеют. умеют наверняка. Пусть посчитают дальность и скорость наших перспективных систем оружия. Мы просим только об этом. Пусть сначала посчитают, а уже только после этого принимают решения, которые могут создать дополнительные серьезные угрозы для нашей страны. И, разумеется, приведут к ответным действиям со стороны России, безопасность которой будет надежно и, безусловно, обеспечена.
Foreign affairs, we turn to Venezuela, where President Nicolas Maduro has reportedly captured 2 American mercenaries after yet another failed attempt to unseat him over the weekend. Maduro blames the U.S. and Colombia for the botched coup, but both countries, of course, deny any involvement. The American mercenaries were reportedly found with ID cards from a Florida-based security services company called Silvercorp. The company's CEO, a former Army Green Beret, Jordan Goudreau, confirmed the men's identities. Goudreau says he oversaw the 52-person mission known as Operation Gideon, and he says he signed a contract with Venezuela's opposition leader, Juan Guaido, to overthrow sitting President Nicolas Maduro. Guaido reportedly did not fulfill the contract, according to Goudreau, but Goudreau says he pressed on anyway. Now, Jesse, the U.S., of course, says it wasn't involved, but our government currently does recognize opposition leader Juan Guaido as Venezuela's legitimate leader, even though the United Nations continues to recognize the sitting president, Nicolas Maduro, as the country's legal head of state. So do you believe the U.S. government in this case, that it was not involved this time around?
Well, I don't know so much about the U.S. government's involved. Let's get that out of the way right away. You know, in the United States here, we think that we don't go out and manipulate throughout the world, I guess. Well, take a look at the Carnegie Mellon Institute when they did a study and found out from 1948 to 2010, we had interfered in, I believe, 81 or 89 different elections in 45 different countries. So yes, we do interfere. But the big problem I have with this is what these guys doing legal? These people in Florida, this company, Silver whatever they are, they can go out and sign a contract and go out and invade and try to overthrow with coup d'etats violently out in the world, and they're not, and that's legal? That's legal for a U.S. citizen to be able to interfere in foreign policy like that, to where it could have direct repercussions on our country and could create a war, for God's sake. It could create a war. And that's legal in this country. This guy can openly sign a contract to go and start committing war acts with mercenaries. Something's really wrong, Brigitte. Something's very wrong here.